From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., welcome to the Kalb Report, Arab Journalists, Another Perspective. Our series is produced by the George Washington University, the National Press Club, and the Joan Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. The Kalb Report is underwritten by a grant from the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. Now our moderator, Marvin Kalb.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and to another edition of the Kalb Report. I'm Marvin Kalb, a senior fellow at the Shorenstein Center. Our program today, Arab Journalists, Another Perspective. Imagine for a moment that you are an Arab journalist based in Washington or New York at the United Nations, responsible for explaining America and American policy to your part of the Arab world. You know that since 9/11 and since the opening of the Iraq War, relations between America and the Arab Muslim worlds have worsened dramatically. How does that affect your reporting? Are doors still open to you, or are they shutting in your face? Can you still be, if you ever were, a fair and balanced reporter? And is there a real difference between being an Arab journalist and being an American journalist? And if so, what are those differences? I've invited 4 Arab reporters to discuss these questions and others. They may not be representative of all Arab reporters, but I think they'll help us understand the Arab approach to the Middle Eastern problems that have so absorbed this country. To my left, a geographic description only, Salamai Nimat, born in Jordan, now president of Pax Arabia, a former Washington bureau chief for Al Hayat, an Arabic language newspaper published in London and distributed throughout the Arab world. Nimat appears frequently on many broadcasts in the U.S. To my right, Abdurrahim Foukara, born in Morocco. He's now Washington bureau chief for Al Jazeera, the most popular cable news operation in the Middle East. Foukara earned his PhD from Glasgow University and later worked for the BBC World Service and AllAfrica.com. He joined Al Jazeera in 2002 and has served both as the Washington and United Nations bureau chief. To my immediate left, Hisham Melhem, born in Lebanon, educated in the United States at Villanova and Georgetown. He is now a senior analyst and consultant for Al Arabiya, the second most popular cable news operation in the Middle East.
Value judgment already.
He was for a long time Washington bureau chief for one of Lebanon's major newspapers, An-Nahar. And finally, to my immediate right, Raghida Dergam, born in Lebanon, educated at the State University of New York at Plattsburgh. She is a columnist and chief diplomatic correspondent for Al Hayat. She's also a political analyst for NBC and LBC, the Lebanese Broadcasting Corporation. Okay, lady and gentlemen, as Senator Clinton might say, let the conversation begin. If you had one word to describe American policy in Iraq, what would that one word be? Salami.
Chaotic.
That's good. One word.
Oh.
Hisham.
Oh.
Chaotic.
Quagmire.
Quagmire. Bergiba.
Still unfolding.
Still unfolding. That's 2 words.
2 words.
Unfolding.
Unfolding. Abdurrahim.
One word. Full of unscalable consequences.
One word.
Unscalable consequences. I'm not getting a very flattering portrait, that's for sure. But words are only words, whether used as one word or 2 or more. What has been the consequence of American action in Iraq? Salami?
I think there are short-term consequences we witness today in Iraq, unfolding day by day. There are long-term consequences that we cannot judge today because we really have to wait and see how it settles down. When the dust settles at the end of the day, we don't know. In Iraq, there was a regime that is one of the bloodiest dictators that existed in 20th century and then the early 21st century, responsible for the deaths of 1.5 million people, whether directly killing his own people, about 300,000 people in mass graves, or whether in the war with Iran, which he invaded, and the war with Kuwait. So it was a good thing to see such a dictator being overthrown, regardless who was responsible for doing it.
You think it was a good thing that the U.S. went into Iraq in order to get rid of Saddam Hussein? I would have
supported the devil himself if he was going to get rid of that dictator. Now, I did not know that in the process of toppling that regime, that so many mistakes were going to be committed, which would result in the situation as we see it today. Very messy situation, to say the least.
Abdul-Hakim, tell me, from your point of view, do you feel that it was worthwhile for the U.S. to go into Iraq for the purpose of getting rid of Saddam Hussein?
I think that if things had gone according to the theoretical plan originally put forth by the Bush administration and Tony Blair, it would have been worth it. Having said that, and having mentioned Tony Blair, I think even at the time when there was still talk and debate about whether the administration and Tony Blair should embark on that experience, there were a lot of questions, particularly regarding Tony Blair, because Tony Blair comes from, obviously he's the Prime Minister of the UK, and if there was anybody who would have been in a good position to predict with historical hindsight what may happen, what may lay ahead, given the British experience in the region, it should have been Tony Blair.
Now, you are leaving open very widely the probability that it was okay for the U.S. to go into Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein. I would like to know whether, if one were watching Al Jazeera, the network that you work for, would you have found that point of view expressed?
No, I mean, if you're watching Al Jazeera, the point of view you will find expressed is not what may have happened. The point of view is what is happening.
That's right. Now, did Al Jazeera, while the invasion was taking place, and since that time, has there been an occasion that you know of when Al Jazeera ever said that it was a good idea to get rid of Saddam Hussein?
No, I mean, not in those clear-cut terms, but what Al Jazeera and some of the other stations beaming out of the region had always said is that, especially in the way that the government of Saddam had dealt with the media, that there was a pro thing to be said for Saddam, and there was an anti thing to be said for Saddam. Okay. But when it actually came to the invasion, I don't think that there was any single moment in which it was said in clear-cut terms that this was a good thing. It was a good thing to do.
Okay, Birgitta, tell us what your own personal view is and what the point of view expressed by your newspaper was.
The war was not welcomed, neither by me nor by my newspaper. In fact, I thought, and speak for myself, I thought the fact that this was not an honestly presented war, there was never a clear reason given as to why this war. Remember, I was at the United Nations, and the apparent reasons were claimed to be weapons of mass destruction. And I knew that this was not the right.
You knew it at the time?
Absolutely. I knew, because I was following the disarmament of Iraq from the chaos time, the first man in charge of, and I think a lot was done by the United Nations in making sure, in stripping the Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction that were illegal, stripping Iraq of these weapons.
Was that in your newspaper as well, the kind of skepticism about whether there were weapons of mass destruction?
I think we always thought that there were other reasons for this war.
Other reasons like what?
Well, I mean, remember that there was a mercurial list of reasoning for this war. One day it was weapons of mass destruction. Another day it was, anyway, it was never said clearly this is about bringing down Saddam Hussein. I think otherwise the American public wouldn't have approved this war.
And you wrote at that time that, in a way, is to suggest or to state that in your view and based on your journalism, there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Absolutely. I wrote that clearly.
Why do you think that?
But if I want to say,
No,
go ahead, please.
No, please.
No, I was just saying is that I want to agree with Salama that if many Iraqis would feel that they were never going to be able to get rid of Saddam Hussein without a military invasion. So if we are talking about it in that sense, then yes, the majority of, or some of the Iraqis anyway, would have said, bring any military on, we need to get rid of this dictator. I am addressing this from sort of the American public receiving the explanations as why we went to war. And the same thing with the Arab public. The Arab public never trusted the American intentions behind these wars, behind this war and other wars.
And other wars as well. Hisham, you were opposed to the invasion of Iraq?
Yeah.
Did you wrote that?
Yes, I was opposed to it. I was in that category of Arabs who opposed Saddam Hussein, spoke against Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq war. I used to belong to, and I'm proud to say, I used to belong to a minority of Arab voices that denounced Saddam when he was killing the Kurds and killing the Shia. And I used to say this is a war between a dictator cloaking himself in Arab nationalism in Baghdad against a dictator in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, cloaking himself with the garb of religion. And I said the biggest losers are the Iranians and the Iraqis. And I think I can say that I turned out to be correct. To me, George Packer, in his excellent book on Iraq, The Assassin's Gate, quotes an American official, former American official, who was in government when the decision to invade was taken, and he said, that official said, I will go to my grave wondering why we invaded Iraq. I remember saying, that this project is breathtaking when you think of it in the sweep of things historically. The United States sending an expeditionary force to a strange land to do something as radical as remaking that society, according to President Bush, in our image, to create a democracy in a land that did not know anything about democracy, in a land where the history and the tradition negate America's views of democracy. We went to Baghdad and to Al-Anbar and to Al-Basra fishing for Jeffersonian Democrats, and Jeffersonian Democrats are not to be found there. Jeffersonian Democrats are not to be found practically anywhere. And I think, notwithstanding the reasoning for weapons of mass destruction and everything, this was a transformational project. You are remaking history.
But a transformational project can be a very positive thing, too.
Yeah, if
you could be transforming a bad thing and turning it into a good thing.
History will vindicate you, even if you are seen at a given moment as doing something that's quote-unquote illegal, that did not receive the blessing of the United Nations. If you succeed, when those who succeed write history, and those who write history vindicate themselves. But those who lose, or those who mess up a situation like what we have today in Iraq, are not going to have the luxury of writing history.
But I don't think it's over yet.
No, it's not over yet, that's true.
We should,
the way we are going, so I mean, what you can say with certainty, the last 4 years were disastrous. And when you look at the situation in the Arab world, and you see rising anti-Americanism spreading like a new religion
when people were dying in the
East,
millions in the Second World War, getting rid of, in the war to get rid of Nazism and fascism, we're talking about 37 million civilians died in the Second World War. Nobody today tells you it was a bad idea to get rid of fascism and Nazism and the imperial designs of the Japanese.
The analogy doesn't work.
Oh, let me just continue.
Please.
What I'm saying is true that it is a total mess as it stands today, but this is not over yet. I think we need to wait a little bit before we make a final judgment on a transient and temporary situation.
How much longer? This is almost the beginning of the 5th year of this war, longer than the U.S. was involved in the Second World War.
Well, this is a different kind of war. This is not a traditional war where you have a regular army facing another regular army. You have people, insurgents hiding within the civilian population. You've got insurgents coming from abroad. Al-Qaeda is basically a foreign terrorist organization infiltrating into the country. You've got the remnants of the Ba'athist party that they have nothing to lose by fighting because they lost everything. They lost power. We have regional powers like Iran and Syria who want to undermine the democracy project in Iraq. Now, we cannot say that they won, and we cannot say that the Americans and their Iraqi allies and the elected government of Iraq have won yet, but they haven't lost either. And I think it's
You sound
premature.
very much like the White House.
Very much. I may sound like whoever you
I
want,
mean, this is what
but
the words
you know,
are saying.
In my opinion, it's not over until it's over. This war is still ongoing. It has not been settled, neither in favor of Al-Qaeda, the insurgents and the remnants of the Ba'athists, and the Iranian Syrian supporters, nor has it been settled in favor of the Americans, the Iraqi elected government, in the first elections, free elections in the history of that region.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
This is
Raghida.
true. This last statement is absolutely true. I think it is not concluded yet. I believe that the authors of the war, in my view, never had democracy as a project. But I think President George W. Bush believed it is a project for democracy and for liberty, as he says. And I think that the biggest mistake, one of the big mistakes he made is when he said, bring them on. And they came in. And so it became, the war was no, it became a problem of fighting terrorism in Iraq. And along with that, the president said something that was really not welcomed at all when he said this is about taking the war on terrorism away from our American cities, as if Iraqi cities are permissible for this war on terrorism. At any rate, at this point, I have heard some in the Arab world say that thank God for the United States and for George W. Bush for fighting our war. What do they mean by that? Meaning fighting the extremists, those who want to take, these, we call them terrorists, call them extremists, call them that they want to impose their own kind of life on the rest, or the majority of the Arabs. And I think the jury is still out, except that the element of Iran now is incredibly essential. And I don't think the United States is without options. I think right now, and I've written that in the last couple of weeks, I think one of the ways that we can say to Iran, deliver, and Iran must deliver not only on the weapons of mass destruction, on only stopping the uranium enrichment. I think there should be a conversation with Iran, come to the table. You need to stop interfering in Lebanon and bringing that country to the brink of a civil war and collapse. You need to stop interfering with the Palestinians' right to choose their own way of living, and there is a Palestinian Authority. And if the Iranians refuse to do any of the above, including stop really playing havoc in Iraq, I think in that case we don't need to invade them. I think we should just say, yes, certainly, here is Iraq. Yeah, we broke Iraq, but you know what? You own it. You fight this war right now. And I think that will absolutely frighten the regime, and I think that probably the regime economically cannot afford that, and probably they will be brought in, weakened from within, and then we will be redeployed only in the neighborhood, if you will, the fleets, the aircraft carriers, and I think we don't need to go further than that for the moment. Serve notice and be serious about it.
The two of you are expressing not a pro-American point of view, but you're certainly sympathetic to the expression of American policy by this administration with respect to Iraq. And I'm just wondering quickly, is your newspaper editorially in support of what it is that the U.S. is trying to do in Iraq?
You have put it from the point of view, from your point of view, from the prism of how do we feel about the American policy and what the Americans are doing. There is a conflict there, because the Arab world is now looking at what's going on in the region also from the point of view of what does Iran want in the region. What is Iran doing in Iraq, in Lebanon, with the Palestinians?
I understand that, but answer my question. Is the Al Hayat newspaper, is that newspaper in its editorial columns, and perhaps in its news stories, taking a position that is sympathetic to the American policy in Iraq?
Yeah, but you see,
if I'm going to be categorical, although we need to recognize there's pluralism within the newspaper, Raghida could have an opinion. We have a couple of other writers in the newspaper who might disagree with her. There isn't one editorial opinion in the paper. However, if we're going to kind of look in general as an editorial policy, as a general policy, no, it is not sympathetic to the American point of view.
Not.
Except,
Okay.
you know, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. You know, in Iraq, everybody is condemning America's mess over
Right.
there. In Lebanon, you are split. There are those who think that the Americans have helped establish you know, United Nations Security Council resolutions that ousted the
Yes.
Syrian occupation of Lebanon, providing for democratic elections and backing a government that is directly elected by the people against forces backed by Iran and Syria who try to topple the democracy. So it's not something that you could answer
In other words,
so
you
easily.
just, it's not the same thing that it's being pro-American or anti-American any longer in the Middle East. You can be critical of the American policies in Iraq. I was against the war. I still think there's a failure and bad intention, probably a dishonest war in Iraq. But I think the American policies and positions vis-a-vis Lebanon are something I support and I welcome.
Okay. Abdurrahim, let's try to give it a somewhat different perspective here. From Al Jazeera, if one were to watch Al Jazeera 24 hours a day, and a lot of people probably do, what would you think is seen as the major American miscalculation in Iraq?
Gosh, there are so many.
So many miscalculations.
So many miscalculations. I mean,
Well, give me the top one or two.
well, I mean, how about this for starters? The issue of perception, of the issue of how the invasion of Iraq was going to be perceived in the Arab world, and the calculation or the miscalculation centered on not seeing the disconnect between the majority of the Arab world and how it saw the invasion. And I think it would be safe to say that there were very, very, very few people before the invasion who would have supported it, either in private or in public. There was that disconnect between how the majority saw it and how the Shalabis of the Arab world saw it.
Chalabi being the person
Ahmed Chalabi
supported
being
by the U.S. government.
Exactly. And while there was a sector of Iraqi society that enthusiastically espoused the idea of the invasion for reasons that we all know, basically because of what Saddam had done to the
Yes.
Iraqis. And that is the main point of the miscalculation. What Saddam had done to the Iraqis, only the Iraqis knew. The majority of Arabs outside of Iraq did not actually see Saddam in the negative light that the Shalabis of Iraq saw Saddam in.
I think this is really,
Yes,
I mean, we're doing injustice to the Iraqis and to history and to Saddam. I will make a distinction between how the Iraqis saw the American project or invasion, whatever you want to call it, and the rest of the Arabs. I'm interested more in the Iraqis. I think there is a problem. I have a problem with the Arab perception outside Iraq. There's a great deal of hypocrisy and double standards in that perception. Many Arabs should have known, or they have known, the extent of Saddam's historic crimes against his own people. I used to refer to Saddam when everybody practically was applauding him in the Arab world as the Pol Pot of the Arab world. He's the worst, most oppressive, dictatorial, bloody murderer in modern Arab history.
Now, you were saying
That regime was the closest thing in the Arab world to a totalitarian regime.
Now,
and yet the Arabs liked him because at one time they said he was fighting the Persians, quote unquote, that he supported the Palestinians. And there is this thing in the Arab world, some people in the Arab world, unfortunately, they like a dictator just because, quote unquote, he stands up to the Americans or stand up to the Israelis. But the damage that that man did to his own people and to the Arab world, invading two countries in the span of 1 decade, is monumental. And to me, I think, I mean, historians will always discuss this issue, whether the invasion of Iraq was wrong, inherently wrong, regardless of the way it was executed, whether we had the stupidity of having L. Paul Bremer as the American face for the invasion for a full year, or the American face for the occupation for a full year, or whether we would have reached the same mess if we conducted it differently. I mean, historians will continue to debate that for a long time. The fact was most Iraqis wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein. The Kurds were dancing in the streets. If I were a Kurd, I would have been dancing and I would be intoxicated with joy to see this man gone or defeated or on the run or in the hole. Most of the Shias welcomed the end of the regime because they welcomed the end of their tormentor, their collective tormentor. They were not dancing necessarily because they remember 1991, when we, the Americans, called on them to rebel, and when they did rebel, we turned our backs and Saddam slaughtered them.
So you're talking about 60% of the Iraqi people, the Shia, 20% the Kurds.
80,
so you're still left.
The so-called 80% solution.
Right.
Yes.
So you're still left with the 20%, which are quite unhappy.
Absolutely. That's why the United States, I mean, when Bush immediately after the war began making his own incredibly ahistoric analogies with Germany and Japan after the Second World War and Iraq after the fall of Saddam, that told you something about the president's lack of knowledge of history, because that comparison doesn't work. And also, everybody in Japan and Germany accepted defeat and they surrendered. In Iraq, a segment of the Iraqi society did not defeat. And yes, the Sunni Arabs may constitute 20%, but those 20% ruled Iraq for 80 years. And they had the skills and
support the insurgents.
No, but they had the skills. Many of them felt, now many of the Shias will probably do to us what we did to them for 80 years, essentially.
Let me add two miscalculations, at least in my own personal eyes. One is historical, the other one is political. The historical one, and that's putting aside what the British did or did not do. But there was another historical precedent in Egypt with Napoleon. Napoleon put forth more or less the same reason that we're talking about now in Iraq. He went to democratize Egypt.
Right.
And sorry?
He used the term civilize Egypt.
Well, he went to civilize, but he had a definite democratizing project for Egypt, and we know what the outcome of that was, and the outcome of that was actually undermined by the British, who actually convinced the Egyptians, much like Al-Qaeda today in Iraq, that the French were atheists who were trying to get rid of Islam in Egypt. So the experiment failed. The second one is that under Saddam, Iraq was subjugated to 12 years of sanctions. I find it quite mind-boggling that for someone who's actually sitting outside of Iraq with no real sources of intelligence within Iraq. The French were the only Western power that actually had real intelligence sources inside of Iraq for 12 years. That both Washington and London did not make allowance for the possibility that Saddam had actually 12 years in which he came to a definite conclusion that the invasion was coming sooner or later. And if you look at what's happening within the realm of the insurgency now, I don't find it quite impossible to espouse the idea that Saddam and the Sunnis had 12 years during which to prepare for what is exactly happening today in terms of the insurgency.
Let me pause at this moment just to remind all of our listeners and viewers that this is another edition of the Kalb Report. I'm Marvin Kalb, a senior fellow at the Shorenstein Center at Harvard. Our topic is Arab journalists, another perspective. I'm here with Abdurrahim Foukhara of Al Jazeera, Hisham Mellon of Al Arabiya, Raghida Dergam of Al Hayat, and Salame Nimat of Pax Arabiya. I said at the very beginning, when I introduced you all, that you four may not be representative of Arab journalism, either in the United States or in the Middle East. I mean, you were all born in Arab countries. Two of you, Hisham and Raghida, were actually educated in the United States, and you're both citizens of the United States. Help us understand Arab journalism. And when I ask the question, I have a number of things in mind, but the first is, during the coverage of the Lebanon war in the summer of 2006, on Al Jazeera a great deal, but in a lot of the Arab media, when people were trapped in an Israeli bombing attack, they were often described as martyrs. Now, I can understand as a journalist the use of the word victim in a bombing run, but not martyrs. And I'm wondering, for example, Abdurrahim, help us understand why that word would be used, and is that an acceptable word for an Arab journalist to use?
I don't know if it's an acceptable word for an Arab to use. I think using it certainly has triggered controversy, and not to use it would, now that it's been used over about 10 years, to stop using it would raise an even bigger controversy.
Well, in journalism or in politics?
In journalism and in politics.
Why in journalism?
Well,
what is the rationale? You explained to me, and through me to a lot of other people, what is the rationale for the use of the word martyr when you are describing a victim, person who happened to be in a place that was bombed by the Israelis?
Well, let me first of all just finish off what I was trying to explain. If you made that editorial decision today to stop using it, if you were Al Jazeera and you made that editorial decision, you would have quite a perception battle on your hands in the Arab world, because that would give raise to all sorts of questions as to
that's what I'm getting.
Why
what would the question be?
Well, the question is, has Al Jazeera sold out to the Americans, to the Israelis?
Use the word victim rather than
if you stop using it now, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that I'm.
If you're convinced that this is the wrong word, why you keep using it?
I'm not saying it's the right word or the wrong word. I'm just saying that using it is controversial. If you stopped using it, it would be just as controversial. Let me say this.
It's not the use of the word terrorism. Who is a terrorist? The same thing. That's controversial as well. I mean, I know what you're saying. I never use the word martyr in my writings personally, not even when it's Rafiq Hariri, and he is referred to as a martyr by many. I personally do not use it, but that's my choice. But, you know, and I'm not defending Al Jazeera. Actually, I'm quite critical of Al Jazeera a lot of times in terms of substance and in terms of presentation. But I think equally as controversial is the use of the word terrorism and terrorists in the Arab world, from the Arab points of view about the American media.
That word is loaded. That word has a religious meaning. And it's extremely dangerous to use it.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I don't use it, I despise it, and I'm against using it, especially even when people are victimized, and like Rafiq al-Hariri. In Lebanon, everybody refers to him as al-Shahid, the martyr, Rafiq al-Hariri. When he was killed on February 14th, 2 years ago, on St. Valentine's Day. When Rafiq al-Hariri woke up on that morning, he did not want to be a martyr. He wanted to live. And anybody who knew Rafiq Hariri, even people like me who disagreed with some of his politics, he was vivacious, he had zest for life, he was full of life. He did not want to be a martyr. He was assassinated, and there was a political reason for the assassination. So every time we tell people he's a shaheed, he's a martyr, we are deceiving them. We are not telling the real fact, which is he was assassinated for a political reason and probably by a state.
Salami, let me get to you. I have a question here that relates to criticism that you offered of Al Jazeera. And you were quoted as saying, I think I'm right here, Al Jazeera basically diverts attention from the real issues happening inside the Arab world. The lack of freedom, the authoritarian regimes, the torture that takes place in prisons. They divert attention, you went on, by focusing only on two stories. Americans killing Iraqis in Iraq and Israelis killing Palestinians in Palestine. Now, I'd like you to elaborate on that. And tell me if you think that kind of criticism of Al Jazeera is widespread.
I wouldn't say this criticism is widespread because Al Jazeera is quite popular in the Arab world. Now, you know, I keep always arguing that popular doesn't mean it's good. Sex
Right.
and crime sell on TV.
Right.
It doesn't make them good things.
Right.
But to be fair to Al Jazeera basically has, instead of leading public opinion, has decided to be led by public opinion. Public opinion in the Arab world is very bitter as a result of successive defeats. They're bitter because they're oppressed at home, and in the minds of people in the Arab world, the Arab-Israeli issue, the Palestinian issue, has colored everything. When the Americans invaded Iraq, it looked like, here we go again, the Israelis, the strategic allies of the Americans, are killing Muslim Palestinians, and here we have the Americans now doing the same thing with the Iraqis. And the media helped, you know, the media is part of public opinion. It reflects public opinion. So in that sense, you cannot go and say Al Jazeera carries an agenda to be legitimizing terrorism and glorifying violence that is victimizing a lot of innocent people. However, I stick by what I said. Al Jazeera has given a sense of legitimacy, and of course we have to make difference. You cannot say that everybody in Al Jazeera is doing this. I'm talking about editorial policy being drawn in Doha. They will never, Al Jazeera, they will never do a documentary on how the Emir of Qatar, the leader of Qatar, staged a coup against his father and took over power in Qatar.
Well, I mean, he provided the money to set up Al Jazeera.
Okay, fine. But they would carry all kinds of stories. Al Jazeera also is not free to operate inside the Arab countries to deal with the scandalous things that take place within the Arab world. So it's partly because there's a culture where it looks at journalism as a form of jihad. It's not a service to the public. It's a kind of advocacy journalism that some people would accuse Fox News of doing. But we've got more of that happening in the Arab world. It's a mission, it's a qadiyya, it's a cause you're fighting for. And people approach journalism in that spirit. Of course, there are exceptions. You know, we're not talking about people, you know, these two pillars of American Arab journalism in America. We're talking about the sense among people in the Middle East that it is not enough just to say it as it is.
Okay.
You've got to have a stand.
Just 1 second. Abdurrahim, you have a chance now to sort of answer. Are you on a jihad, or are you covering the news? Or do you regard that as the same?
The thing about Al Jazeera is a bit like and I hope I'm not choosing an inappropriate metaphor here, but Al Jazeera is a bit like the scripture. You can find in it whatever you want to find in it, but the fact is that it has a worldwide viewership of about 50 million, and the fact is that its offices have been closed down in almost every Arab capital.
Why?
And that is a big statement on what it tries to do and what sort of relationship it has with the government of the day in those capitals, who do not look too favorably on it because they see it as putting forth a narrative that's different from the official narrative in those countries. And let me just add one more thing. I think it would be slightly disingenuous to accuse Al Jazeera of not turning the camera on the government of Qatar. Why? Because let's be frank about this. Let's look at the mother of parliamentary democracy, United Kingdom, and look at its institution, the BBC. The BBC was taken to the cleaners by the Blair government when it broadcast the story about sexing up intelligence for invading Iraq. And the point I'm trying to make is that whether you're in a democracy or in a closed society, or even in a totalitarian society, such as what we had before the invasion of Iraq, governments do not like the light of scrutiny. That is the bottom line. Any government, beginning with the Bush administration, beginning with the leader of the government of the biggest democracy or the oldest democracy in the world, and ending with a government like the government of Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe.
Right,
Governments do not like the scrutiny.
I mean, I really hope that this is not going to turn into a program about Al Jazeera, but because it's not fair. There's lots of criticism that should be said about all of our publications, and
well, go ahead.
But I want to say something about Al Jazeera. It is last week only. You had a big scandal because the emir has received Shimon Peres, and Al Jazeera did not show it for 24 hours, and then Al Arabiya, I believe, they showed it. And then even the public, that is Al Jazeera's public, started to go crazy, saying, what do you mean you're hiding this sort of thing from us? So you're not our voice anymore. You're not the voice of the frustrated, the angry with the Israelis. But back to the question of miscalculations, because it's related to what I'm saying. I think one of the biggest miscalculations made by this country before we went for the Iraq war was to suppose and dismiss the Arab street and say, we don't need to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. We don't need to resolve the Palestinian issue. This is a very live issue in the minds of every Arab. It is not the only issue. It is used as a scapegoat quite a number of times, yet you cannot dismiss it. Right now, I do not believe that this is a lame duck presidency of George W. Bush. I believe 2 more years is quite a lot of time. And I think Bill Clinton, at the last year of his presidency, tried to do something about the Palestinian issue. And I think this is exactly what they're realizing right now, if I just may finish this point. In the administration here and in the Arab leaders, the Arab moderates, are saying, do us a favor, understand that this has got to be done now. If you want to look after the next generations, American generations' interests in the region, you need to get that issue off the table. In your war against terrorism, in your war in Iraq, via Iran, you need to get the Palestinian issue off the table.
I have heard that as a journalist now for 38, 40 years.
Except what's being said now, Marvin.
It has been said time and time again.
It doesn't matter, it needs to be done.
No, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be done.
Yes.
Not at all, but I'm only saying that this is not that magic moment where it may be.
30 years ago, we were not in this kind of war, the war of terror, in the way that is going on.
Fair enough.
We were not in a quagmire in Iraq. We were not in a situation where we're... And the problem is, right now, we need to understand that we should really lean on the Israelis and resolve the Palestinian issue. Otherwise, the camps
Believe me, the very phrase, we have to lean on the Israelis, will accomplish nothing.
Well, then you know what? Guess what? We should be ready for the worst to come.
Well,
I'll be very honest with you, Marvin.
It may be.
This public should know the worst
Go ahead.
is to come.
This is what I really
Can we talk about the media?
Yes.
Okay. You asked the question.
Help me understand. Forgive me. Help me understand Arab journalism. For example, Mohammed El-Manshawi, whom you may know, the head of the Arab Media Project, said, quote, self-censorship is rampant among Arab journalists. Editors and senior staff in media often gain their position by having close ties with the ruling elite that protect their interests. Abdurrahim, you were quoted a year or two ago as in effect confirming that. I had a quote from you saying, any journalist who tells you that he or she doesn't exercise one form of self-censorship or another is basically telling you a fib. We all work under such difficult and delicate conditions, and you've already articulated that. Hisham.
Okay. First, you ask whether we represent the Arab media.
Yes, do you?
In one word, to be succinct?
No.
No, we don't. And to generalize...
Neither here nor in the Middle East?
Neither here, I mean, I'm going on a limb. Neither here nor there. Neither here nor there. Now, you talk... No, wait.
These three are the 3 biggest stars in the Arab media.
I'm called now a pillar. Now I'm
in America, and they're trying to be modest about it. They are a very important part of the Arab media. They don't represent all the media. But it's a very important part of the media, especially in a story out of America, which is so much involved now in the Arab world.
Absolutely.
But let me...
Please,
look,
go ahead.
The Arab media, like Arab society, is going through an incredible transformation and a transition. Transition to where we don't know. And that's the nature of transitions. There's a great deal of chaos and a great deal of unsavory symptoms that appear, as the great Gramsci said once. there is the question that's been asked now in the Arab world is whether you can have free media in mostly unfree or partially free societies.
Whether you can have a free media in an unfree society?
In Lebanon, the journalists are getting killed.
My editor was blown up to pieces last year.
Getting blown.
One of my best
You are on a
friends.
hit list. I'm on a hit list.
I know that.
You know that.
No, but the point is, we're not talking about us. I'm talking about
We're
the whole
getting
media
killed.
in the region. There is a transform. We're going through a transition. The Arab media today is much, much better than it used to be 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but we have a long way to go. To judge the Arab media today as one whole is a mistake.
Right.
We represent different societies,
right,
going through different phases of transformation and development socially, politically, and economically. I come from a country where we have traditions of publishing that goes back more than 175 years. The best newspapers in Egypt were established by Lebanese. My paper is 80 years old. I mean, we have the pictures of editors who were jailed by the French colonialists and by every Lebanese government since that time, and we're proud of it. But we do not have a free media in the Arab world the way we talk about free media in Europe and the United States. Now we have struggling journalists who are dying, and anybody who's interested here as a student in journalism, you just go on the website of the Committee for the Protection of Journalists in New York. Every week there is a statement about an Arab journalist being harassed, killed, imprisoned, and tortured every week. So on the one hand, we have people who are struggling. And when we talk about Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya or Al Hayat, there are good journalists in Al Jazeera, and there are not so good journalists at Al Jazeera. There are good journalists in Al Hayat, and there are not so good journalists in Al Hayat. The same thing in my paper, in my station, everything.
Well, that's true in most organizations.
But at least here you have more or less sometimes universal, you cannot be a lousy journalist if you work for CBS or New York Times, and notwithstanding, I mean, the problems that the New York Times and other papers but in general, in the Arab world, what goes for media is mostly a confusion between commentary, report writing, editorializing, the divide. No. What do you mean not anymore?
This
What do you mean not anymore? Most
Al
Arab papers
was a
don't.
pioneer in bringing something amazing into the Arab media. Notwithstanding all the faults that Al Jazeera is now that you were talking about. Yes, Al Haya, and there was one at one.
How many people read Al Haya?
No, let me finish. It's okay. It's okay. Calm down. Calm down.
Come on. Brigida, make your point.
Yeah. First of all, Al Haya is, as you know, I hope that you're not underestimating Al Haya. It is read by the elite of the Arab world and the decision makers. So, and it is a number one leading paper. So I hope Hisham does not mean to underestimate Al Haya. That's number one.
Okay, go ahead.
I think
I will let this carry on.
I think this is not serious.
I will let this carry on.
I think this is not
later.
serious, and it's not the right moment.
Is there a journalism school in the Middle East?
There is. You see, the schools have been. When you use the word school in journalism in the Middle East, you normally speak about big publishers. For example, the editor.
I'm talking about a university.
No, but I'm trying to. Yes, I understand, but I'm trying to explain to you the use of the word school. An-Nahar, for example, the School of Journalism by Ghassan Twaini, who's still alive, whose son was murdered, as you know, and he was the editor of An-Nahar, and another colleague of ours who was also killed in Lebanon, also from An-Nahar.
Hayat, former editor-in-chief.
And Al-Haya is the school for the person who established Al-Haya.
So what you're saying is that
the school is meaning that's the style that they build.
The school is the newspaper, and the newspaper produces a certain style.
Indeed.
But I'm asking something very basic. Are there schools of journalism in the Middle East?
Almost in every university.
Almost in every
major university you have
so that
journalism.
the journalists who are trained to be journalists, and they pick up certain skills. Now, there's a set of skills and there's a set of values. What kind of values are they picking up? Are they picking up the value of a free press?
Very good question. I think, in theory, yes, they do pick up the value of actually Western journalism standards are being taught at journalism schools throughout the Arab world. However, when these people graduate and they go into the newspapers or televisions and news agencies, they have to reflect, their own society. In other words, they are not operating in a vacuum or in a theoretical kind of sphere. There are political considerations.
But you're more important than the values.
There is self-censorship. Of course, the
Is that right?
Yes, of course.
Of course.
The political system will trump. You said yourself.
Okay, I tell you, in Libya
Gotta find
and
your
Syria,
quote.
in Libya and Syria, you're not going to have a journalist who goes and really speaks his mind or reports things. Okay. In Lebanon, you have this room to maneuver. Okay, maybe also in Yemen and Morocco. So it's not the same. We cannot generalize about the media. But ultimately, the media reflects society. It's a mirror of society. If the society is not really free, if the society is oppressed or is intimidated because you could suffer consequences, then self-censorship will take place to varying degrees depending which country you're talking about.
Is there a free press in the Middle East?
Yes.
Relative free press in some countries
Partially.
of the Middle
Yes,
East.
partially relative.
Partially.
Yes, partially relative. There's a clear answer.
No, but I mean,
but
you know, I mean, is
I'll tell
it
you,
totally
you know,
free? I mean,
for instance-
isn't
No,
there
but-
self...
wait a minute.
Just one moment. Isn't the same thing in the West? I mean, why is it that you are thinking that the American media or the Western media is totally free of self-censorship?
Totally.
Totally free. That is not true. I challenge you. You know, if you go...
There isn't a decent publication you can read in Cairo. The biggest Arab country, 75 million people, there isn't a single, I mean, the most important paper in Cairo is Al-Ahram. It's a rag. There is no journalism in Syria. There's no journalism in Libya. There is partially free journalism in Morocco, in Yemen, and everything. And I'll tell you, ask the question why we don't
10
have
seconds.
investigative journalism in the Arab world.
Why?
Because we don't have rule of law. Because we're on a legal system that is independent, that they can protect you as a journalist and protect your sources. I cannot, sometimes many journalists cannot even rely on their own editor to protect them. I used to get complaints from my editor because a government, the foreign minister of a neighboring country would call him, he would call me in Washington.
Fisher.
That's
We've only got 2 minutes. Only 2 minutes. I would like, and there are a lot of journalism students in the audience. In 30 seconds, no more than that, and I'll start with you. Give me the lesson, the large thought that you would like to leave with journalism students. Start.
The thought is to report dispassionately. Because if you report passionately, you become part of the story. The school of journalism, in the school of journalism that I subscribe to, there is absolutely no good.
There is absolutely.
It's absolutely no good to report passionately. You have to be dispassionate in your reporting.
Okay. Ragida.
Yeah, I think dare and dig. I think this is so important to
Dare and dig.
Yes, don't take whatever you're being told, this is the story. Dig beyond what they're saying and dare do that. Because if you don't, then you've been used as, you've been spoon-fed. And there's a lot of that in journalism.
Thank you. Hisham.
Well, remember Socrates. Ask the right questions, the hard questions. Don't do what Socrates did. He committed suicide, poor soul. But be a pain in the eyes of the authorities, if you will. I mean, there is the old anarchist in me when I used to be a radical student with long hair, and always be distrustful of authority, whether political or religious.
Interesting. Salami.
I would say that, keep in mind that things are not black or white. Look into the gray areas. And don't take the trodden path. Always have a fresh look at things. Just because a lot of people have done similar stories before doesn't mean that they got it right every time. Have a fresh look, be original, and think for yourself.
It's marvelous. I want to thank you all very much. Our time is up. I want to thank our wonderful audience, really. Thank you all very much for coming. I want to thank our co-sponsors, the George Washington University, the National Press Club, and the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I want to thank, too, the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation and the many radio and television stations around the country that will carry this program. But my greatest thanks, my gratitude really, is to my 4 colleagues representing the Arab world of journalism. You have given us a perspective from within yourselves with a great deal of honesty, and I appreciate that very much. That's it from now. I'm Marvin Kalb. Good night and good luck.